So we're going to take a look at the project submission that's due in week 3. So each week on the project is going to build upon what we did in the previous week's submission, as well as what happened in the discussion area and what you've done in Minitab. So if you look at week 3 and the actual Canvas course, when you click on the week 3 submission for the project, it's going to tell you to go back to the week 1 project directions. I don't build the course, but this is how we have to do it. So this file is located in week 1 under the project instructions. So first we're going to go through the instructions, and then we're going to go through the rubric, and then I'll have a separate video that kind of walks you through that APA template we talked about. So in part 1 of the project, you're collecting your data, which you should be done with by the end of this week so that you can submit it. So in part 1, what are you doing? You are presenting your data, all 100 responses in table form. To produce your tables, you should use Excel or any other software. So here's the thing, with Minitab, some of you have had issues exporting files in Minitab. So you can make a table in Microsoft Word. You can do 100 rows and 3 columns if you have 3 questions. So it might be easier to just create the table in Word. I've had students tell me that that was faster, or they SurveyMonkey puts it into an Excel file, so they were able to copy and paste from Excel. A lot of students have said Minitab is not the most friendly for that part of the data. So I need to see all 100 responses for every question you asked in a table. That is part 1, okay? Part 2. Part 2 is from your planning worksheet. Now, this is going to be in a paragraph form. I don't want to see number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. This is APA format, okay? So what I would do is I would give a brief introduction to part 1, and I would say, I'm looking at the claim blank. It was interesting to me because blank, here is my data. You don't need a huge paragraph. You don't need 10 sentences. Just a little introduction to here's my data. Then you're going to roll into part 2. A lot of students like to use the headers in APA. So they'll have part 1 and their little paragraph and their table, and then part 2 as a header, but we don't number the answers to the questions because we're writing this as a technical paper. So you're going to tell me, what is a sampling technique that you use to collect the data? You did that in your project planning worksheet. How do you know? So when I say how do you know, I'm talking about that citation you had to provide in that project planning worksheet. Hopefully we've all completed the reboot, so you should know 100% if you've got that. Then you have to describe the bias. This is a new question. Bias is like favorite foods. Everybody has one. Your survey is going to have a bias, always. If a survey or a study says they don't have a bias, then they're lying. So here's a couple of things to think about with the bias. The way that you collected your data, did it exclude groups of people? So an example of this would be if I'm using social media, do elderly people have access to social media if they're in your population? That's only if they're in the population. Or what about people with really low socioeconomic status? They may not have internet. Do they have access to your survey? What if they're not in your friends list? Did they have access to your survey? So bias means you're excluding people kind of unintentionally. So you didn't intentionally exclude these groups of people, but there's that. Another example of bias could be response bias. So, I mean, if you ask people what they weighed, are they always going to be truthful? Or if you ask people to disclose how often they consume alcohol, are they always going to be truthful, or might they feel pressured by social norms to not answer correctly? So that's what we're talking about with bias. You want to look at, was there any group of people that might not have had access to your survey that's in your population? Or is there any maybe iffiness on a reason somebody might not respond totally truthfully to your sample? When we're asking qualitative versus quantitative, that's a new question. Qualitative data would be word responses. So you need to go back to week 1 and look at that week 1 video lecture I posted. And there are different types of qualitative and quantitative variables. You need to identify for each of your 3 questions if they were qualitative or quantitative and what type of variable were they. So you would also want to include a citation there, because that is information from a textbook. You did not walk into this class knowing what qualitative is, what quantitative is, ordinal, or nominal. You need to make sure you're using a valid academic source for this, and you can definitely visit the library for information on that. Does the data constitute a population? This goes back to the week 1 lecture. Did you survey every single person in your population? If the answer is yes, which in the 4 years I've been doing this, it's never been yes. But if the answer is yes, then yes, your data, meaning your table, is from a population. If you did not survey every single person in your population, then it is a sample. Okay, that's what that question is asking. Then you would give a citation because you didn't walk into this class knowing what a population was and what a sample was. You learned it from the information in the class. You'd want to use an academically valid. Again, you guys could cite the textbook for all of these and be okay. All right, you don't have to cite a bunch of other sources. The textbook will suffice. Is the study descriptive or inferential? So there is sometimes confusion on descriptive versus inferential. Descriptive means you're describing something. So you're describing, this is my survey, this is the data that I got, this is what I see in my data. So descriptive is describing, but you're also giving calculations. The mean, the median, the mode, the range, those are descriptors for your data set. Inferential statistics means you are making decisions based on your data for an action. Not saying my claim is valid or not valid. You're saying, well, I did this marketing data and it said that people want, I don't know, a drop off laundry service. So I'm going to start a drop off laundry service. There's an action that happens at the end. In all the years that I've been doing this, it is very rare that a student is taking action on what was done in a survey. So think about that really carefully. Include a citation. Again, your textbook is good. That's part 2. So all of that should be in a paragraph or even multi-paragraph format. If you find you need to separate the paragraphs, that's fine. APA writing, not number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, answering questions, okay? Part 3, treat your data as you would a data set from the homework. Why is that in the directions? Because when you open Minitab, it's exactly as a data set from the homework. You need to put in the very first cell the name you're having for whatever variable you're entering Minitab dash your name, just like all of your data sets for the Minitab homework. Then you're going to be able to include an appropriate measure of central tendency. That means mean, median, mode, variance, range, standard deviation, etc. You will probably do this for more than one variable because you need 8 calculations and you need 2 visuals, okay? So this is part 2 and point 4 kind of combined here. So when you're entering your data set, you need to do it just like you did in Minitab. You need to construct a frequency distribution. What is a frequency distribution? We go over that in the reading. It's a frequency table. So you're going to divide your data into 5 to 8 categories. So if you were doing how much alcohol is consumed, you would have people consume between 0 and 1. Here's my tally. Here's my count. People who consume between 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, or people who spend $100 to $150 on groceries. You're dividing that data set. They have to be even classes. So sometimes this can be a little tricky because we don't always have that nice, robust data. You can definitely inbox me if you can't make 5 intervals, and we can alter that slightly. But also, if you're struggling getting the frequency distribution to be done in Minitab, some students it doesn't work out very nicely for them. You can do this by hand in a table in Microsoft Word. So all you're doing is taking 5 intervals from your data set. If you don't have 5, you can send me an inbox, and you're just counting how many responses were in those 5 classes. And that goes, it's a 2-column table. It's very simple. Then you're going to create 2 appropriate visual representations. Now you're treating this just like your homework. So when you make your histogram or your chart, pie chart, or whatever, your stem and leaf plot, your name has to be in the export, just like when you did it in the homework. Then you're going to want to give a paragraph underneath that visual. So just for the 2 graphs, you don't need a paragraph under your frequency distribution, that explains, I chose this graph because this is coming from your project planning worksheet. This is why I chose this graph. This is why I feel it's the best way to display my data. and here's my citation. Keep in mind, you're trying to display the data of your claim, not your follow-up questions. You only need two visuals. So maybe you want to make a bar chart of your claim data and maybe a pie chart. Maybe you want to show the percentages, so you do a pie chart. That is more focused on those two things. Occasionally, students do a really good job of breaking it up by gender. So they may have a pie chart of gender because they felt like the women overwhelmingly responded differently from the males. And that's a place where one of your visuals might deviate from the claim. But definitely one visual has to be your claim data. Both of them have to have your name and the export. Then in 5, you're going to do a written summary of the statistics. This is building off of what you did in the project planning worksheet and what we did in the discussion. So you're going to do your 8 calculations. You're probably going to need to pull from 2 questions. That's why I gave you guys those follow-up questions. So you can do a mean, median, mode, range, standard deviation, variance. Any of those from your questions. You have to have your name in the export. So you've got to make sure you put your name in that first cell. You're just going to give me a written summary of what you calculated. You're going to say, this is the mean, the median, the mode. This is this. Then in that brief paragraph, you're going to give me the meaning or interpretation of each. For example, if you've given me mean, median, and mode, you should tell me the best measure of central tendency for your data set. That goes back to the discussion we already had in week 2. So I'm not asking for an incredibly detailed technical thing. I'm just asking for a paragraph where you're saying, my data range from this value to this value. I had some outliers, so I feel like the median was the best representation, or I didn't really have outliers. Most of my values were all clustered together, so I think the mean is the best measure. That's what we're looking for there. I'm not looking for you to do anything incredibly technical. I'm just looking for you to take that export, put it into words, but also to look at what is the best measure of central tendency for any of the ones that you calculated. So if you did it on your claim question and then you did it on your follow-up question, so for instance, some people had a question about how many cars a household had, and that was their claim. And then they followed it up with how many people are in your household. Well, they could compute a mean, a median, and a mode for both of those. So they might have done that for their 8 statistics. They might have used both of those, but the mean might be better for the number of cars, whereas the median might be better for the number of people because maybe there were outliers in the number of people. So that's all this is doing, is looking at what's the best measure. Be very careful when you're calculating the mean and make sure you're checking off the right mean value in the table and you're not getting that SE mean odd information that pops up. You want the mean, median, mode. You don't want the SE where we're starting to emit outliers automatically in Minitab. If you have questions on this, you may turn it in. It says a 2-page written summary. The thing in part 6 does say that, but we're not including the exports or the graphs and the data tables in that 2 pages. So when it says 2 pages, and you don't freak out because you have like 5 pages, because 100 pages of it in a data table is going to take like 2 or 3 pages. That's fine. Make sure you include your export of your statistics from Minitab with your name in it, as well as the exports with your visuals with your name in it. And that is this project. So mainly the workload this week is putting those 100 values into a table and then actually computing those statistics and visuals. But a lot of the information you've already got done here. So I know this video is very long. Make sure you go through this video and you check mark it to make sure you have everything there. Now we're going to briefly take a look at the rubric. So here is the rubric. You have to have your 100 data values to get your 10 points. If you don't have those data values, you're going to automatically have less than that. And it's going to also be rated on submission. So if you have less than 100 data values, that's 4 points versus 10. Sampling. The sampling technique is justified with a valid source. This is why I had you guys resubmit, because I don't want you to lose points twice. So if you're resubmitting and you're getting the valid sampling technique, you have to have a citation. So here would be where you're at with 10 points. Make sure you do that reboot so you've got the right information. Population versus sample study type submission, and explains if you have a statistic or a parameter. I went through all of that and whether it's descriptive or inferential. In the rubric, please note, You must explain. You must give a clear citation to support these conclusions. So you need a citation for population versus sample. You need a citation for your study type. You need a citation for statistic or parameter, descriptive or inferential. The textbook is a citation for all of those, okay? Everything. The visual submission must include the minimum number of visual representations of the data with a sourced explanation. So that is, I chose a pie chart because a pie chart is the best way to represent the percentage of the population with a response. I'm looking for that. You have to have a citation. Your textbook is a valid citation. And then descriptive statistics, you must have all of your statistics, the minimum number of 8, and you must have a citation for why those are the most appropriate. And that really only refers to the mean, the median, and the mode. So when I'm talking about the most appropriate, I'm talking about I need a citation where you tell me this is the most appropriate for my data set based off that week 2 discussion. So that is the rubric. It is worth 60 points. You're going to get a lot of feedback on here. I'm using the highlighting tool, but it's changed a little bit when I start putting in the highlighting. So I'm going to be typing text into these submissions when possible so that I can avoid that it blocks out the words where you can't see it. But if you're following the rubric, this is an easy 60 points. In the last week's submission, all you're doing is adding a tiny piece. Okay, it's a tiny piece in part 5 and part 6. So you shouldn't you should be having the bulk of this is done at the end of this week, and a lot of the work we did in the project planning worksheet, so that your week 5 submission should be an easy large amount of points there. If you have questions, definitely inbox me. If you're not sure if you have bias, send me an inbox. If you're not sure if it's a descriptive or an inferential, send me an inbox. If you need help on your APA, send me an inbox so I can point you to the right information.